Which goes back to Abdu'l-Baha's point that the new age will be an age less masculine and more permeated with feminine ideals. Assuredly, it's women who will establish peace among mankind. He's not telling you that men have no role in this. It is about empowering women here in this case to also take on that role because they're an important component of achieving global peace. It's about the exaltation of humanity, not this gender or that gender here.
Welcome to Toward Peace. I'm Evan Goodwin. Today we have three guests that will explore the role of women in advancing humanity towards a state of peace, or to use the Baha'i terminology, the most great peace. So in the lead up to this discussion, it became apparent that this topic is, to say the least, complex. While we want to ensure the free flow of ideas, we'd also like to keep this conversation within a certain scope. So to that end, we've chosen to focus on one specific work. That work is The Promulgation of Universal Peace, a compilation of talks given by Abdu'l-Baha as he was traveling around the United States in 1912. The work was published a decade later in 1922, in the aftermath of World War I. In this work, Abdu'l-Baha provides a broad, spiritually infused framework that positions women as indispensable to ending global conflict. A century later, we're still trying to fully comprehend and apply these ideas. So I'd like to now introduce our guest for today. We have Tara Rout.
Hello.
Hello. We have Navid Pourmokhtari.
Hello.
And we have Cynthia Bujold.
Hello.
Hello. So I'd like to just first start with a quote, and then we'll have a couple of questions after each one, and then we'll just kind of freely discuss. So, first off, the most momentous question in this day is international peace and arbitration. And universal peace is impossible without universal suffrage. So it will come to pass that when women participate fully and equally in the affairs of the world, when they enter confidently and capably the great arena of laws and politics, war will cease. For woman will be the obstacle and hindrance to it. Another fact of equal importance in bringing about international peace is women's suffrage. That is to say, when perfect equality shall be established between men and women, peace may be realized for the simple reason that womankind in general will never favor warfare. When they shall have a vote, they will oppose any cause of warfare. There is no doubt that when women obtain equality of rights, war will entirely cease among mankind. So explicit in the above quote is the observation by Abdu'l-Baha that women will not sanction war. Why do women favor peace? And what does this quote infer about the future administrative order of the world so far as questions of war and peace, and by implication, women's role regarding the two are concerned?
So I don't know about the answer to the first question so much, but in terms of the second question as to what does this say about the future administration and women's role regarding the two, I think what it says, or what it implies, is that we have not reached perfect equality. I think that's, to me, the primary message of this particular passage, is that equality is a prerequisite of peace, and peace will occur naturally as a result of equality. It won't need to be fought for, protested, etc. It will be the result of achieving equality, and I think we can look at peace as an indicator of equality. And the fact that there is not peace is an indicator, because people will say there is gender equality, men and women are equal, there's all this evidence that, of all this equality, or women do have the right to vote, therefore their voices are heard. But that's not necessarily true. We do have universal suffrage in virtually every country in the world. There are some exceptions, but almost all countries in the world, women technically have the right to vote. But a technical right to vote doesn't necessarily mean that even suffrage is complete. It doesn't mean that female voices are being heard. And if this is correct, when female voices are heard, there simply will be peace, that will be a natural outcome.
That's interesting that the metric for equality is peace. That's a very interesting perspective.
Or the other way around. The metric for peace is equality.
Chicken or the egg?
Yeah. Well, the Baha'i texts give us some clue as to why this is the case. I think Abdu'l-Baha himself has dedicated the most systematic attention to answering both questions. First, why women will not sanction war. In other words, why do women favor peace? And what does that say about the future administrative order of the world? Somewhere Abdu'l-Baha wrote, for example, that a woman is more tender-hearted. She's more philanthropic, more responsive to the needy. All the more reasons that make her inflexibly opposed to war. That's the word he uses, inflexibly opposed to war. But at the same time, you got to read this side by side. He also speaks about the fact that woman has greater moral courage than the man. Just like that, woman has greater moral courage than the man. What is moral courage? Standing up for certain ethical principles, being peace-loving, for example, and not compromising. It requires great integrity, when you speak about moral courage in the face of grave dangers and consequences, even. So he's giving us clue as to why this is the case. But reading this side by side by the future administrative order of the world that the Baha'i Discourse promotes, what is it? The cause speaks about the creation of a so-called world federal system, a kind of a global commonwealth. Shoghi Effendi speaks about it as, or in relation to what he calls a world superstate, like a United States of the world. And that world order, when it is created, and he gives us specific clue as to what that order looks like. A world tribunal will be created to settle and arbitrate international disputes. A world legislature will be created, which will enact laws and has organizations to enforce that those laws are enacted like that. And it seems like Abdu'l-Baha is telling us that women will be integral to those institutions. There will be not just passive bystanders, but active components of those institutions. For example, Abdu'l-Baha somewhere wrote, mothers need to be included in those institutions responsible for making decisions about war. Why? Because according to his reasoning, a mother will never sanction their offspring to be sacrificed on the battlefield no matter what the cause is, he says, in that kind of a language. But who will be ending up in that world legislature? Again, in the world order of Baha'u'llah, Shoghi Effendi is very much on point about this. It will not be politicians, but the so-called, he says, trustees of the world, the Gandhis of the day. You see, the Malala Yousafzais of the day, the Shirin Ebadis of the day, the J.N. Tickners of the day, the Christine Sylvesters of the day, and the distinguishing mothers of the day. You see, so we're talking about the advent of that kind of a system wherein women will play an integral role in its creation.
I certainly wouldn't dispute any of that, but I think women and society as a whole have to grow into real equality, because women have voices right now, but they're not always heard, or they're not always credited with the same value. And I think that that's something that we can't decree or legislate or edict. We have to grow into that as a society. We have to be committed to the principle and convinced that it's possible. And then we have to implement it and realize it by how we raise our sons and our daughters, and how we value the roles that women play in society, at home, in the workplace. And I think that equality, true equality, will have to rid us of competition between the genders, because women will not have equality. Society will not have equality of women and men as long as it becomes or remains a competition.
I mean, competition by definition is really seeing who is the greater of the two, which
Or I can
manifest
do-
inequality. So,
I can do what you can do, just as well as you can do it. I mean, this should be an accepted norm. It shouldn't be an argument.
yeah. So, what are the obstacles at work that prevent women from exercising meaningful influence on decisions having to do with war?
I could speak a very long time on the answer to that question. There are, and I think Cynthia hinted at it, I think there are two aspects of answering that question, or two aspects to my answer to that question, which is that one is what I would describe as tangible and some are intangible. And I think that they work together and they affect each other, they influence each other, and that they're both necessary to evolve. The intangible is the type of thing that Cynthia was describing, which would be things like our perception of female opinions, our expectations of women and men, the roles that we give to people of different genders.
Some of it is rooted in how we value things. And unfortunately, we put too much value on monetary equivalents. A woman staying at home, raising children, or taking time from her career to birth and rear children doesn't have any monetary value to it, and therefore it doesn't have real world value. And that's an attitude that has to absolutely change. The work that women do, whatever work it is, needs to be valued, even when it's different from what men do. And that is an attitude change that won't happen once again by decree, and it will take generations to recognize and equalize the value in all of those skills, and then also recognize and equalize the value of a woman's mind and the capacity that she has, so that when she sits in that boardroom or in that legislative milieu, her ideas carry the same weight as men's.
What I'm hearing from both of you, you're speaking about attitude change.
Absolutely.
And Tara is speaking about power and competition. And I look at it side by side by the writings, what the Baha'i Discourse tells us here. Regarding the attitude change, so far as it relates to women, again, Abdu'l-Baha is quite clear about it. He wrote somewhere that and I'm quoting him, the assumption of superiority on the part of some men will be detrimental to women's ambitions. Just like that. And so he's implicitly speaking about eradication of prejudices, which is a central theme of the Baha'i Faith. In this case, eradicating gender prejudices. You see? And on the notion of power and competition also, the Baha'i Discourse is crystal clear. The cause does not reject operation of power. It doesn't. But it also asks us to look at power differently. Power must not be this thing that dominates and exploits. There is an entirely different facet to power as this thing that is enabling. We're talking about channel, energy, the capacity to produce unity and love, and ultimately peace. So it's that conception of power that nowadays we associate with femininity that must be taken up. When that happens, Abdu'l-Baha wrote about the phrase he uses, women will end up being, or women arising for peace. That's the phrase that Abdu'l-Baha uses. a believer in 1945 asked Shoghi Effendi, what did Abdu'l-Baha mean by women arising for peace? The Guardian replied, when that order takes place, when we look at power in a different light, when that assumption of gender prejudices are eradicated, women will end up developing a mass public opinion and a consciousness against war. That kind of a calculus.
It's very interesting because Abdu'l-Baha says that prejudice, not the least of which are those that prevent women from fulfilling their potential and engaging in various fields of endeavor, shoulder to shoulder with men, that the root cause of prejudice is ignorance, which can be erased through educational processes that make knowledge accessible to everyone.
Well, on the topic of ignorance,
Good segue.
Yeah.
So one of the potentialities hidden in the realm of humanity was the capability or capacity of womanhood. Through the effulgent rays of divine illumination, the capacity of woman has become so awakened and manifest in this age that equality of man and woman is an established fact. He, Baha'u'llah, promulgated the adoption of the same course of education for man and woman. Daughters and sons must follow the same curriculum of study, thereby promoting unity of the sexes. Woman's lack of progress and proficiency has been due to her need of equal education and opportunity. When all mankind shall receive the same opportunity of education and the equality of men and women be realized, the foundations of war will be utterly destroyed. Without equality, this will be impossible because all differences and distinction are conducive to discord and strife. How can a system of equal education be created, one predicated upon the end objective of what Abdu'l-Baha labels here as unity of the sexes, in this case, for bringing about a peaceful world?
Well, there are different levels of education. And we have an education system in terms of our grade school education, and we have our university type of education, and we have vocational types of education, and we have even preschool education. So there's a lot of things when we talk about education. So there's a great scope for this conversation, actually. And I think we could be having to confine our conversation to what are we talking about when we talk about education. In the Baha'i world, education involves also, for example, the institute process. It's about community education, it's about moral education, it's about spiritual education as well. And in schools, like at least in the West, public schools, or grade schools in particular, there's an actual crisis. Not that women are not being educated, but there's a crisis of boys' education that's going on that I'm experiencing and seeing firsthand and very familiar with personally, that boys are not learning, they're not succeeding in school. And it's leading to and related to a toxic culture of boys in school and the sort of celebration of ignorance in school. And I think that there are a lot of options when it comes to education. There are a lot of people interested in how we deliver education and what the content of that education is, what the pedagogy of that education is, and even what the structure of the delivery of that education is, and prioritizing education and having clear goals of what education is intended for, what school is intended for.
Yeah. One challenge is that people often don't know what they want. Right? How do you know what the ideal outcome of an education is if you don't know what you don't know?
Well, Abdu'l-Baha gives us a clue about it, and building off Tara's point here, that the Baha'i Discourse promotes a holistic type kind of education, you know. One way Abdu'l-Baha gives us a clue is by speaking about force, for example. Somewhere he wrote, the world in the past has been ruled by force. That's how he starts. The world in the past has been ruled by force, but the balance will ultimately shift and the attributes that women are known for, intuition, he speaks about. The spiritual qualities of love and service, he speaks about, will end up gaining ascendancy, that kind of a language. Hence, he wrote, the new age will be an age less masculine and more permeated with feminine ideals, just like that. Hence, the new age will be an age less masculine and more permeated with feminine ideals. Why does he say that? Masculinity, let me just unpack the concept for a second. It has to do with certain characteristics that we associate with manliness, toughness, raw power, physical force. and his prediction is somewhat coming true in that the world, in the context of our educational system, is gravitating that way. In Iceland, for example, Iceland is or has been the pioneer in many arenas related to gender equality. We're talking about the first ever female president that has been democratically elected in Iceland. So they have this educational program. I don't know if you've heard about it. It's called the Jolly program, H-J-A-L-L-I, Jolly. Jolly in Icelandic language means breaking taboo. Boys from the young age learn feminine qualities of care, cooperation, gentleness. They even learn to compliment each other, which goes back to Abdu'l-Baha's point that the new age will be an age less masculine and more permeated with feminine ideals. And this is because when we look at the history of war, war has been a gendered activity, indeed a gendered discourse, as war is implicated in the construction and reproduction of gendered relation. Indeed, the construction and reproduction of what is called hegemonic masculinity. At the end of the day, isn't it not an empirical fact that those who have been traditionally and by and large at the helm of devising policies related to war have generally been men? So Abdu'l-Baha is telling us that any future world order must acquire feminine qualities if you want a more peaceful.
Well, for the last quote is debate. We want to go over the following short excerpts from Abdu'l-Baha's The Promulgation of Universal Peace. Woman is naturally the most devoted and staunch advocate of international peace. We must declare that her capacity is equal, even greater than man's. This will inspire her with hope and ambition, and her susceptibilities for advancement will continually increase. Strive that the ideal of international peace may become realized through the efforts of womankind. The happiness of mankind will be realized when women and men coordinate and advance equally. For the world of humanity consists of two parts or members. One is woman, the other is man. Until these two members are equal in strength, the oneness of humanity cannot be established, and the happiness and felicity of mankind will not be a reality. In truth, she will be the greatest factor in establishing universal peace and international arbitration. Why does Abdu'l-Baha argue that we must declare that woman's capacity is equal, even greater than man's?
What Cynthia was talking about in terms of men and women being in a balanced leadership situation. I was thinking this morning about the fact that we do have women in leadership roles. There are, it's not nearly as many as men, but there are examples of that. And in the vast majority of cases, that woman is there because she's behaved like a man. And that's how she's got there, and that's how she's earned respect. And there's a certain type of feminism that has that as an objective, or at least a step, the demonstration that women can be men just as well as men can be. It's sort of a very early, almost childish step in establishing equality.
Men traditionally have viewed women's roles as lesser, and as soon as women do it, it becomes lesser.
Yeah.
I mean, back in Dickens' times, the clerks, the secretaries, they were men. suddenly women took on those jobs and they're somehow lesser. Like, this has to stop. We have to recognize that men have a place. And, you know, part of it is, I think part of the reason there's so much competition is that as women have ascended and proved that they have the capacity to be moms and homemakers and managers and bosses and professionals and everything, where does that leave men? And, you know, that has been part of the struggle, is that men are feeling like, where's my place in this world? You know?
I think that relates.
Apart from contributing a few cells at the beginning, what's the place? And we need to start valuing equality by sharing all the work that needs to be done, and not devaluing one gender in order to elevate the other.
I think that's what unity is in this situation.
Absolutely.
That's part of the question, is about unity, or at least the next question. Is how is gender equality related to the Baha'i ideals of oneness of mankind? And the notion of the phrase we all like to use of unity and diversity, this idea that everyone has a part to play and all those parts matter, in that people play to their strengths, and if everybody plays to their strengths and not one thing is more important than the other, that doesn't work in a unified functioning anything, that one part has more importance, whether you're talking about a body, or you're talking about a machine, or you're talking about, you know, a community or a household, whatever area of endeavor, you know, even in a corporation where marketing, production, management, like, they all have value and roles. And when those are equally regarded, you can actually have functioning progress, and you can have unity, because everybody's role is recognized and important.
Yeah. Building off your point, going back to the first one, why does Abdu'l-Baha argue that we must declare that women's capacity is equal, even greater than men? Listening to both of you, you know, here on top, when Evan read the quote, strive that the ideal of international peace may become realized through the efforts of womankind. I mean, this passage so finely shows the Baha'i discourse's take on women's empowerment. You know, when we speak about the discourse, any type of discourse, it's about a mode of transmitting knowledge. It's about a mode of articulating reality. Each discourse constitutes certain buzzwords. One of the leading buzzwords in the Baha'i discourse is this word strive. For example, elsewhere Abdu'l-Baha says, strive that your action day by day may be beautiful prayers. Here he's saying, strive that the ideal of international peace may become realized through the efforts of womankind. Strive in the Baha'i discourse is something of a spiritual summon, that you have a spiritual duty to pay attention to something because it's of great importance. And here, the way he phrases this, it means he's talking about women's empowerment. What is empowerment? We're talking about empowerment in a social, political, and economic practice. You know, it's a practice that is about inspiring oneself, yourself, or somebody else to achieve great things, to accomplish great things. When I talk about this notion of empowerment that Abdu'l-Baha is articulating here, assuredly, it is woman who will establish peace among mankind, he wrote. Assuredly, it is woman who will establish peace among mankind. Somewhere also, she is of the greater importance to the race, just like that. She's of the greater importance to the race. She has greater burden and the greater work. And then going back, assuredly, it's woman who will establish peace among mankind. He's not telling you that men have no role in this. It is about empowering women here in this case to also take on that role, because they're an important component of achieving global peace. In the Baha'i cause, this exaltation of both sexes, we're talking about unity of sexes here. It's not to the detriment of the other. The two must be able to co-evolve equally. And Abdu'l-Baha uses the analogy of the bird. If one wing is man, the other one is the woman. The two must be of equal strength. Otherwise, the bird that is humanity cannot fly. It's about the exaltation of humanity, not this gender or that gender here. You see?
I have 3 grown daughters who are, I think, quite exceptional. And a good deal of that credit comes because their father also gave the input and the empowerment and the vision and the example to them of what relationships and family life with a measure of equality can look like.
How is gender equality related to the Baha'i ideal of oneness of oneness of humankind, conceived by Baha'u'llah as the leading principle for establishing international peace?
I don't think that we will have peace on this earth until we rid ourselves of oppression. Oppression of all sorts, starting with the oppression of women and gender. Because I think that once we make progress there, we will also make progress in ridding ourselves of oppression in many other arenas where it exists.
Absolutely. Once, what you said just reminded me of the Universal House of Justice once wrote, the emancipation of women is one of the most important but less acknowledged prerequisites for peace. When we speak about emancipation, it's much more than freedom. It's a mode of liberation we're talking, you see.
It's taking away whatever limitations we've imposed on other individuals, be they women or men, be they different cultures, backgrounds, races, whatever. We need to take those away.
If we have the prejudice based on gender, that's a line that draws through every civilization, every culture, every type of person has that line, every household. And so it is the solid line across our civilization.
Yeah.
And so until we can overcome that huge divide and that innate prejudice that we have,
Yeah.
how can we possibly look to bridge the gap between prejudices of culture or
Sure.
prejudices of all sorts?
Yeah, and it goes both ways, and many now write about it. For example, many have to clarify that not all masculine discourses are violent. We seem to conflate that sometimes, We need to be very sensitive to these issues because many are looking, many men are looking, and many are learning. But at the same time, many argue that not every man is violent, not every man is this, not every man is that. So, a balance in anything or any kind of critique that we have.
I think it's just a matter of recognizing that, and as we progress, we shouldn't throw out old dichotomies and absorb new ones.
Exactly.
Yeah, it's also it talks about the Baha'i ideal of oneness of humankind conceived by Baha'u'llah. And to me, this means the oneness of mankind is a spiritual principle, that all human beings are fundamentally spiritual. Our souls do not have gender.
No.
Our souls have virtues and have capacities and gifts, but they do not have gender. And so gender is just a way in which our bodies enter the world, and a way in which we interact in the physical reality that we have, and our psychology and our hormonal reality, all kinds of things that come into play with that. But at our core, we're just souls. And those souls have qualities. And we've put a lot of lenses and a lot of screens and a lot of division on that spiritual reality and called it gender. And at the core, a soul is a soul, and it doesn't, and whatever body it's happening to inhabit,
Absolutely.
whatever physical reality. And that is where the oneness comes from, and that fundamental recognition of that reality. And often in discourses around gender, that reality is not discussed. The reality is physical, it's psychological, it's hormonal, it's mental, it's a lot of things. And so that's where it gets a little bit hairy. But if we're just talking about human beings, our souls, genderless souls that have a physical reality that they inhabit, then men are just as capable of having those spiritual qualities as women are. And we have different, physical strengths, or even mental or psychological strengths that come with our physical reality. But our spiritual strengths are the same across the board. Men can be gentle and patient and loving and nurturing and all of these things. And it's really important to have that ideal also as part of the conversation, not just women striving to reach positions of power and influence, but also the cultivation and even idealization of examples of manhood that are different. And I say that to my sons sometimes, who are some wonderful men that you know, because we get down on men and manhood, and it's not a bad, men aren't bad. There's nothing bad about
Well, and that's
men
not
or
a good
manhood.
milieu to raise boys in.
No, but who are some wonderful men you might like to be with? And they have, will come up with different ideals and different examples of the men that they look up to and their qualities. So it's about those spiritual qualities being equally manifest and recognized as valuable, and not ascribing certain to women and certain to men, and you can only have one or the other, or you're not really a man, or you're not really, valuable.
Yeah. Your argument reminded me of Judith Butler's concept of gender performativity, she calls it. That it's not so much who you are that determines your gender, but what you do, she says. Yeah, that argument, yeah.
Well, problem solved, guys.
Next!
Should it only be so simple?
But thank you so much for joining us, and look forward to talking again soon, I hope.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you for having us.